All right, there we go. Hi. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for tuning in for our now fourth program in the Student Org Essentials series. So my name is Brooke Olson. I work in student activities, and my role is to support student orgs in all the different ways. So as we were moving into the summer, we designed this series with our virtual environment in mind, and the consideration that we need to be preparing for our school year ahead. So we've covered topics like service, social media use, navigating uncertainty, and they're all posted on the programming page of our website at go.osu.edu/StudentOrgPrograms, and I'll drop that link in the chat for you to go reference those programs if you would like to check them out. And today's topic is all about programming. So we know that programming is often at the heart of doing our work when we're trying to create community or call attention to something important, growing or developing as leaders, reaching goals, all of these things. And programs can be really transformative to someone's Ohio State experience, but also transformative in your organization's scope of presence on campus. So as we're shifting to be smart and effective program planners in our virtual environment, and we know that virtual space can sometimes present more challenges, it's also important to, I think, hone in on the basics of hosting a great program so that we have a really strong foundation and can do this well in any environment. So here to chat with us today about this topic are two colleagues of mine in student activities who work with OUAB. OUAB is the Ohio Union Activities Board, which is a major student-driven entity that works to host meaningful and engaging events for all students on campus that are free and accessible. And OUAB creates hundreds of these great events each year. So when we're thinking about how to help student orgs learn more about developing effective skills around program planning, who better to connect with than the professional staff whose bread and butter is this topic. So Krystal Vielman works with us, and so does Dustin Beech, and both of them are here to connect with us and share their wisdom and experience in supporting OUAB. So please go ahead and take it away, and thanks for coming.
Hi everyone, thank you for that introduction, Brooke. Again, I'm Krystal Vielman-Diaz. I use she, her, hers pronouns. Within OUAB, I specifically work with a few of our programming areas. So in the year I've been here, I've worked with our comedy, lectures, our collaborative events, and now I'm working with our spirit and traditions and visual and fine arts teams. And Dustin can go ahead and introduce himself now.
Hey folks, Dustin Beech. I use he, him pronouns. Similar to Krystal, been with the team for about a year. Actually, fun fact, Krystal and I started just about a year ago. We just celebrated our 1-year anniversary with OUAB on the 3rd of June. So we started on the same day, which was really cool. So the areas that I support and have supported for the last year, concerts, special events, and then I support our graduate and professional student programming committee, which, if you didn't know, we host about 200 events per academic year, specifically for the graduate and professional student community through OUAB. So that's really, really unique and something that not all programming boards have the resources and the funding and the opportunity to do, but something that Ohio State has made a really cool priority. So those are some of the things that we do. But if you all are ready, we're going to kind of kick this thing off. So again, we're calling this from an event to an experience. There will be ties throughout the presentation that kind of draw attention to that. So some of the things that you can expect for today. So we're going to do a little bit of an exercise here with some polls on getting to know you. We want to know a little bit more about you so we can tailor the presentation and what your expectation should be of us and what ours can be of you. A little bit about the planning process in going through your event. We're going to do a breakout room activity, and then we're going to talk a little bit about virtual event as kind of Brooke kicked us off. There are some considerations that need to be made for virtual events. If those are going to be happening, if those are not going to be happening, we need to kind of have that in our tool belt. So we're going to kind of go over some things for you. And then of course, we're going to leave some time at the end for some questions. We know that those come up. So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, and Brooke will kind of help us keep up with those sort of things. But I would assume if you have questions, we'll hope to address those in the content of our presentation. But if we don't, feel free to ask them at the end or put them in the chat, and we'll make sure that we identify those. All right. So in the in kind of this process, taking an event from an event to an experience, we will look at the following kind of 5 items and use this as our skeleton structure. So looking at things like ideation, pre-planning, planning, execution, and assessment. We know that you don't just show up to the event, it happens, and then you go home. There is a before, there is a during, and an after. So we're going to kind of, in a way, chronologically help identify some of those things and really highlight what can make a strong event or a strong experience.
Okay, before we jump into this, we're actually going to go ahead and launch some polls so we can see where you all are. So first, we are going to ask, what role do you currently hold in your student organization? That's awesome. It seems like we have a lot of faculty and staff advisors on here, a good amount of just general exec board members. So it's awesome to see. A lot of this information is obviously going to be applicable to everyone. So I'm glad that we have a mix of everyone here to get that going. Another question that we have for everyone is, if this poll would open, is what has your role been in the planning process of your programs? So for some context, OUAB uses project leads as their lead, and then they have a committee supporting them. So the project lead or the event lead would be the head person programming. Event support would be those people that they delegate tasks to, and the general volunteer is the person that just shows up the day of the event and helps where it's needed. Awesome. Again, it looks like we have a really good variety of people here. It's definitely helpful if you have been leading the event. Obviously, you might learn some stuff today. Hopefully you're learning stuff today, but there's probably going to be some things that you're already aware of, which is also great. And last but not least, I want to know, how many events does your organization typically host in a year? Again, a really good mix, but it does seem like we have some organizations that are programming a lot more frequently. So this is really good to know. We definitely want to make sure that all of your events are successes. So in order to do that, Dustin, you have a square over the screen.
Are we good now?
Yep, we're all good. Sorry
Cool.
about that.
I had to close the polling results.
You're fine. So to kick us off, our first step is we're going to talk about ideation. So here we're going to approach ideation looking at 3 different steps. Oftentimes organizations just begin their brainstorming and they just kind of throw out ideas that they're like, wow, this would be really cool. Let's just go ahead and do that. And that can be great and everything, but have you ever gone to an event and left feeling like, that was a good time, I enjoyed myself, but that's really it. There was no impact. I didn't gain anything from that experience. So we want the first step instead to turn your event into an experience is finding your why. So some questions to consider is, who is your target audience? How do you want your guests to feel during that event? How does this event fit into your organization's purpose, mission, and vision? Sometimes it can be a little tough, especially this is not something that you typically do when you're approaching your event planning process, but it makes a world of difference, so it's definitely a good practice to start implementing now. So essentially, the point is to plan backwards by starting with your why. So events that start off with a goal in mind tend to be the most successful. Make sure you're upholding your mission. That's honestly most important. So now that you've found your why for your event, what do you do next? Now it's time to start brainstorming. So here are some questions to critically think about to get you started. So what do you want to accomplish? What can you reasonably handle? I think it's great to start thinking outside of the box. Like, the bigger the idea, the better, but it also is important to know where your limitations are. What are some major steps you need to accomplish to make sure that you get your intended results? So with this in mind, develop ideas with your organization. Obviously, this is not a one-person job. You want to make it a collaborative effort, make sure everyone feels heard, because again, this event is supposed to represent your entire organization. So now it's time to narrow down your ideas to the final decision, but it's always important to make sure you have backup plans. You never know. Sometimes you can say, wow, I really want to bring this specific person, and now COVID exists, so they're not able to come and be there presently, and that's not something they're comfortable doing virtually. So who else can accomplish that same task for that event? If you got a couple ideas that you like, it's a good time to start researching what it could actually look like as an event. So some questions to ask here are, has this event happened on your campus before, or is it something that you host annually? Have other student organizations or your chapters at different campuses done a similar event? And if they have, who are your resources? Who can you reach out and speak to? We are going to talk a little bit about this towards the end of the presentation, but it is also important to start already thinking about what can this event look like in a virtual platform.
Yeah, thanks, Krystal. I think that's great. One piece that I would add on to the research piece is, are there groups that have talked about doing this program? We'll talk a little bit about collaboration and partnership later on, but is your net large enough? If collaborating with another organization, would that benefit things like attendance and impact? Is there another org on campus that this event is more tailored to, that has a more specific targeted audience that you could hope to hit and actually have that impact and have that program resonate with them the way that you will? So Krystal basically covered it all, which is awesome. All right, so the next piece is the pre-planning piece. So obviously there are going to be things, there are going to be non-negotiables, or there are going to be variables that are fixed, right? Things like cost or your budget, the day of the event, those sort of pieces. So it's important to think through those, whether you sit down with an advisor, I saw there were a few, organization presidents, there were a lot of organization advisors on here, and then there were some other folks that were, other executive positions or other volunteer positions in the org. Sit down with the executive board, with the officer, with whoever gives you guidance and counsel to talk through some of those things. Talk through your budget, talk through the timing of your event, right? Similar to what Krystal talked about in the programming world and event planning, we don't necessarily say if something goes wrong, it's when something goes wrong. And that's a kind of a pessimistic approach, but kind of going back to what Krystal was talking about of realism and being realistic and practical, that's kind of how it happens. So do you have backup dates? Do you have a backup venue that's already locked down as well in case this one has to get canceled or you have to move for whatever reason? A huge consideration in timing is, does it fall during a major campus week? Or is the student's attention or your primary audience's attention on you only? Or are there other things that are going to go on that are going to be pulling them in different directions? And we'll talk about things like parking and those sort of things. But again, at Ohio State, those are all factors that we'll kind of need to consider in the pre-planning process of what else is going on in the space adjacent, in the building, in that parking lot, in that outdoor venue. You know what I mean? What are those kind of points? Again, like I talked about earlier, is this going to be a partnership or collaboration? In your research, did you see another org that is similar to yours that you could collaborate with, that maybe you've not done that in the past, or maybe you have done it and it went really, really well? And again, you can continue to increase your net and your impact on those students, or on that audience rather. And then that last piece is always something that Krystal and I, that's just the political landscape of Ohio State in a large, Big Ten institution, is who has to have their approval on this? Who needs to have eyes on this proposal, on this event? Who are your gatekeepers? Who are your stakeholders in that sense of who you can rely on, or who this kind of needs to go through in order to get approved to have, let's say, an outdoor event or something like that. All right, I'm going to go on to the next one.
Great. So Dustin did already talk about this a little bit, brought up the idea. But yeah, so there are tons of different ways to get funding and different organizations that you can collaborate with. But for today, just for simplicity, we're going to just talk about CSA funding and the OUAB collaboration application. So specifically with CSA, if you don't know, that's Council of Student Affairs. You as an organization are allowed to apply for up to $3,000 in funding programming funds. They do have some restrictions, and it's lengthy as to what exactly you can do within certain buckets, so I definitely recommend looking at those guidelines. As far as the event goes, it has to be classified as either academic, art, diversity, outreach service, social, sports, or recreation, or personal or professional development. So obviously, almost any event would fall into one of those buckets. So again, definitely encourage you looking into that. The events have to be open to any Ohio State student to attend. So that means it can't just be for your organization. It can't be just a recruitment event. It can't be a philanthropic event because obviously that's a little bit more restrictive and there's money involved. But last but not least, there are different windows as to when you can apply based on when you want to have the event. So if you already do have your date set, make sure you're going onto the CSA website to see when the deadline to apply is. So for example, on here, I have that if you want to hold an event between August 16th and October 15th, you have to get that in by July 1st. The OUAB Collab app is a little bit different. It's not a funding source. People do think of it that way. It's a little bit different. The point is to actually collaborate with OUAB. The question asked is, what is your organization's dream event so that we can help that become a reality? So student organizations should have an idea of what they want the event to be, but we don't want it to be fully planned out. We want it to be more of a conversation where we bring our strengths and what we want the event to look like and compare it to what you want the event to look like, and hopefully we align so that we can make the event happen. So the event, again, does have to be open to any Ohio State Columbus campus student. So again, that has some restrictions. It can't be a fundraiser. We can't host galas. And again, it can't just be closed off to your organization. It has to be open to everyone. Our applications are not open right now, but if that's something you are interested in doing, our applications will be opening sometime in September, and that will be for events that will be happening in spring 2021. And thank you for the plug, Brooke. You are much appreciated. Okay, so now we are officially in the planning stage. So there are tons and tons and tons of different planning tools. Your organization might already have something that exists. But today we will specifically be looking at the MARITS Global Event Design Journey Mapping. So MARITS was able to create a science-based, people-centered method to event planning, and because of this, it's definitely helped lay out a way to take your event to the next level, and that's where we really talk about from going to an event to a really personal, immersive experience. So what you're looking at on the screen right now is an audience journey map. And it's a super simple idea. It's a diagram that illustrates the steps your attendees or your audience will go through in engaging with your event. There are 8 phases that fall into 3 distinct groups. So that's pre-event, where you'll see announcing, attracting, and anticipating. During the event, where you'll see arriving, entering, engaging, and exiting, and then post-event, which is extending. So during typical event planning, you'll see that there's a lot of focus on entering and engagement, which is great. That's the bulk of your event. But that does mean that you're leaving a lot of the experience up to chance. So for the sake of time, we're going to delve a little bit deeper into the pre-event planning, the entering and engagement pieces, and then the post-event planning. So Dustin is going to go ahead and get us started with the pre-event planning. And sir, you're muted.
We're still learning mute, man, where is my brain? We're still learning Zoom here. Thank you, Krystal. So I appreciate that. So again, you know, before even I got into event planning or those sort of pieces, I hadn't even really thought about some of those things of like, oh yeah, entering, or, you know, some of the pieces that Krystal addressed in those 8 phases. So it will benefit you to be intentional on that. So even in the pre-event planning piece, looking at things like advertising and marketing efforts, and your announce, what does that piece look like? Is there a website that's attached? Is there a QR code? Is there somewhere that they can go to get more information, right? Think about, defining your target audience or your audiences. And then as a result of that, do you then kind of target and funnel through then your marketing efforts as a result? So these were kind of the actions. I would kind of go left to right on this, or right to left, excuse me. I would start with the questions, right? Just as kind of Krystal and I have talked about, the intentionality is really, really important. And if you can think about the why and critically think about those things before just, hey, we're going to throw up a social media announcement and this is how it's going to be. So kind of looking at how are you building excitement around the event? How do you draw that in? Is there a countdown that happens? Do you make, Instagram or some sort of social media posts that say like, hey, stick around. We're going to be dropping this at like 5 o'clock. You're not going to want to miss this. How do you break through the noise and capture the attention? Again, considering what other things are happening on social media that day or in that week. How do you kind of break through all of that and hone in on that particular audience that you're targeting? What's the value of attending this versus not attending? How are you going to create this experience that they're not going to get anywhere else, right? And with OUAB specials, there has been this theme for the last few years of once in a lifetime. So the hot air balloon that we brought last year is a great example of that. There's not a lot of folks in their lifetime that would be able to have that resource, whether it's funding or availability or whatever. And so how are you providing this like once in a lifetime, this student or this attendee cannot miss this event? They're going to have serious FOMO if they do. And then what's the most exciting thing about the event? And that could also be kind of that tied to that value proposition. What's the thing that's going to draw them in the most? And how do you highlight that, whether it's in the announce or, during the day of show, those sort of pieces. And then during event planning, so again, kind of covering two of those stages that Krystal talked about when you're looking at entering. So one thing that they like to talk about is resetting the intention, right? I think about this I get really frustrated with like parking issues or traffic or things like that. So if I have that lens and I'm attending an event or whatever my commute looks like to that event, if I am frustrated or challenged, my brain might not be in the right space. I might not be in the right headspace for this program to have the correct impact on me. Like I may need to reset my own intention, but how do you do that as an event planner? And so I think looking at actions of what does entering the venue look like? When you all came on the call, we're not experts here, but when you all came on the call, all of the presenters were muted and we had music playing, right? And so that's a thing that we do for our Get Involved sessions now that we're virtually is how are you setting that environment where, okay, you're in front of a screen and maybe you hated those songs, but at least it wasn't just like, 20 people staring at each other awkwardly and being quiet. So how are you setting that intention when you enter the venue? Is there music? Is there specific lighting? If you're in the Ohio Union, how are you working with those crews to try and set that vision? Because most of the time they want to help you out with setting that intention, and they'll kind of do whatever you ask. Obviously there is a cost that's associated with some of those things, but how do you set that environment for them to show up, and what does that look like? Line control is another thing that can frustrate people. How long have you been waiting? Is it organized? Are you taking tickets? Is there a sign-in table? Some of those sort of pieces. What does your signage look like? If your event is in the Ohio Union, is there signage to let people know, hey, it's on the 3rd floor, or maybe hopefully your email communication or your flyers or your marketing has said, hey, it's on the 3rd floor of the Ohio Union. But how do you, whether it's signage or actually having volunteers directing people up there? So again, that question, what experience do you want your audience to have as they transition into the event? That can be a lasting one, and if that one is overly negative or not positive for them, unfortunately, that can sometimes overshadow the experience or the impact that you're trying to leave them with the content of your presentation. Looking at engaging, how are you showcasing these different experiences that you're hoping that they leave with? What does your event layout look like? Does it make sense? Is it frustrating or confusing for folks? education and entertainment, how are you balancing those and kind of even setting intentionality around those of, a comedy show might be more entertaining, but a lecture or a panel or something like that might be a little bit more educational. Now, there are definitely going to be probably entertaining elements to that, depending on your presenters or who you have there on stage or your panel or whatever that is. But what does that look like? And again, going back to your why, what are you hoping that attendees are taking away from this and walking away from? How do you weave the event elements into a cohesive experience? How does it make sense? Kind of, again, event layout. And we'll talk about that a little bit later with a schedule. And then what things need to be amplified or narrowed? What things deserve more focus and what things kind of deserve a little bit less? And you don't necessarily need to worry about that piece as much because we really want to hone in on this one.
Awesome. So last but not least, we're going to talk about that post-event planning. So similar to what Dustin was talking about, looking at those questions first, what stories do you want your attendees to be sharing, and what do you really want them to take away from that? But more importantly, why should they keep coming back to your events? Like, what are you doing to create that ongoing relationship so that when they follow you on Instagram, they're like, oh, this group has another event, I definitely have to go because that last one was just so dope. Like, what are you doing to keep that going? So that audience storytelling piece, something that I feel like a lot of organizations do or should start doing is when you create that individual event hashtag, how are you bringing it back from that marketing piece to the end so that you have people reliving that moment and sharing that out? So for example, if you go ahead and collected the student information for the people that did attend, you can send a follow-up email thanking people for attending, but also asking them to send different videos and pictures from the event so that you can create a recap video. And that's going to show up on your social media, but it can also be shared out on their social media. And that makes it a little bit more personal because they realize oh, they included me in that. That's super cool. But it's also a great time to also include information for your future events. Like, if you like this, stay tuned because you'll like this too. I think my audio might be going out right there. I think we're good. Okay. So again, if you had a discussion-based event, something a little bit more educational, you can continue using that hashtag outside of it to continue those conversations. What are you doing to continue engaging people afterwards so that the interest still grows? This is also important, especially for an annual event. How are you going to get people hyped up? So that's something that we do for our spirits and traditions. So things like homecoming, you'll see the pictures of the parade every year as we're gearing up. Same thing with welcome week, same thing with commencement. It's that memory, and it's going to trigger that memory of when they experienced it last time, and they're going to want to do it all over again. So we're going to go ahead to the next slide and talk a little bit about your physical event spaces. We have a little delay, and that's fine. So we tend to do the same venues over and over again. I know for OUAB, we really, we are the Ohio Union Activities Board, and we take that name super literally sometimes, and we live and die in the Ohio Union. So we tend to use these spaces over and over again. So what are we doing to intentionally immerse our guests into the event and transport them somewhere else so they don't feel like they're just in the same room over and over again, and it's a new experience? So how are we appealing to all the 5 senses to make it a full body experience? So let's start off with looking at site. Site can be in the decorations you use, whether it's balloons or a background video or LED lights. So let's say you were hosting a carnival themed event. How can we make people believe that they're actually at that carnival? So use those signature reds and yellows and stripes that you see at those game tables. Include decorations with posters around so that they have that same feel. And it's even better when you make it a little bit personal. Maybe someone wants to see Brutus in one of those old-timey carnival pictures, or even members of your organization. Make it personal, make them want to keep exploring and seeing the different details that you put in. So taste. Food that fits the theme for an event is super duper important. So if we're doing something like a carnival, obviously you have your classic food trucks with things like funnel cakes and elephant ears, cotton candy, those things that really bring back those memories. But again, food does hold a lot of cultural significance. So a lot of times we'll have summer themed events where it's either luau or tropical themes. So while you can get something that's super easily attainable, like a pizza or popcorn, why not make it a little bit more personal and give that detail-oriented touch and incorporate some of those classic luau cuisines where people are able to eat different types of food. And on that same token, you can provide some history about why this is a culturally relevant food and why this is something they eat. So they're learning while they're enjoying food. And who doesn't love that? Smell, scent is super highly emotive and can quickly evoke memories and will draw additional attention to the event. And it's also such a minor detail that people don't think about, but really and truly, you can just close your eyes and you can be transported somewhere else if you just have the right scent. So an example of this, if we are doing something that's tropical or beach themed, obviously you don't want the room to smell like salt water, but what if you just have like coconut or pineapple just flowing through the air? That's going to transport you to a tropical vibe and completely change your mood. Hearing themes with music and ambient noises. So you can't have that background sound of carnival noises if that's your theme. But what if you're having like a New York City themed event with the Empire State Building and the Statue of Liberty in the background? Have those ambient city noises in the background, and again, it's going to transport you completely different. It's the little things. People are really going to find value in that. And last but not least, touch. So consider the aspects of the props, the decor, the furniture, and other physical objects. So it goes beyond just like what you feel on your fingertips and becomes a full body experience. So if you are doing something like a carnival, you'll have this classical game, so that'll give you like the hand feel of what you're supposed to be experiencing. But like if it's outdoors, or if the union or if any venue actually allows it, bring in some hay bales, like bring it, make it authentic. Same thing with continuing like a beach or a tropical event. Bring in like a small sand pit where people can play and run their hands through it, and bring the beach to them. And Dustin's laughing at me, but this is great. So
I always just laugh because my last name is Beech, so it's silly and juvenile, but you know, we're bringing the beach to you all, right? I'm here. We're presenting. So, all right, we're going to kind of go on to the next piece here. This unfortunate event accessibility is a really important piece, and unfortunately, it tends to be an afterthought. We want to encourage you to make it one of your forethoughts, right? Be in this event planning piece to think through these sort of things. So we've kind of identified 3 different areas of event accessibility, from marketing, the physical space, and then the content. Again, it is a requirement, and especially from the university, from even a public institution standpoint, to abide by ADA laws and those sort of pieces. So it should be considered throughout every step of the planning process. So if you've not been considering those things up until this point, that is okay. From this point forward, let's move to be better, all of us, in regards to that. And I think even OUAB has some things to learn, and some things from this COVID-19, this virtual landscape that we are learning, services that are out there, things that students have requested that we're interested in making happen. So from the marketing stand piece, what are there any alternative text for images that you have, right? And so if you have certain abilities or certain disabilities that way, having alternative text that goes along with that image can really, really help. As in a Brutus Buckeye wearing a chef uniform or a chef's hat or something like that. Like, how do you accompany those sort of pieces for folks that are on readers or folks that don't have, you know, the resources visibly? Color choice is really important when thinking about even something like color blindedness. What colors are you using? How is it drawing in? And how does that piece kind of apply to accessibility? And then looking at captioning your videos. This is one of the easiest things to do. There are video captioning services out there. There may be someone in your organization that's particularly talented in a video editing landscape or something like that, or has those skills. That can make a really, really big difference, especially when we consider visible and invisible particular identities, that sometimes you're not going to realize that your audience has these things. They're not going to raise their hand and say, hey, I have a disability. Can you accommodate me right in the middle of your event or something like that? So again, making that a piece of your planning process is really helpful. That way you can have those things, right? And I think from a marketing perspective, even something as simple as having the sign language icon available at the bottom of your flyer, if you have interpreting services available, or if you've thought through those things, that piece can be really helpful. The physical space. Again, I talked about the frustration of parking. Accessibility, that's a huge piece as well. Where is the closest place to park? Have you thought through those things? Are you sending that out in your emails and in your marketing to say, hey, great, we can't wait to see you. By the way, here's kind of this piece. How close are you to an elevator, and what does that look like? I don't know. I've only been at Ohio State for a year. I don't know if there are certain buildings that are really like stairs only and were built, before ADA or any sort of those pieces. I've worked on campuses where that's the case and there really is no elevator or anything, any accessibility in that building. But think through those things, right? You may be hosting an event off campus. What does this look like? Thinking about seating arrangements and how that applies to accessibility, right? And fire marshal code and all those sort of things. And in the union, they will help you with that. But other places, they may not do that. And then what does your layout look like? Is it generally accessible? Thinking through some of those pieces. And then event content, again, kind of going back to captioning videos. You can have live captioning available at your events. Obviously, there is a cost associated with that, but that can be something that will be really helpful too, that up on the screen, or if you have an iMag, or if you have anything, and if you're in a room that offers those resources, being able to offer captioning and translation is very important. Multiple activities too. Consider physical disabilities when it comes to that. Sensory warnings for things that are strobes or flashing or really loud or something like that. I know it. I had hosted a concert at another school that I worked at in Florida prior to Ohio State, and we had fireworks that were going to kick off the end of the evening. So before our headliner got on stage, we said, hey, at the end of this headliner set, there are going to be fireworks. We don't want you to think anything else is going on or any of those loud noises to scare you. So even just giving some consideration to those things can be really helpful as well.
Awesome. So now we're going to transition a little bit more into logistics management. So we have everything planned out. We're starting to really get excited about everything, but we really need to figure out how we're going to organize and keep ourselves in check. The first step is to create your timeline for accomplishing each major task. Work out defined details of each major step by breaking down big tasks into small, more digestible tasks as possible. This helps with execution for the day of the event and delegation as well. So assign tasks to individuals. Planning is rarely a one-person job. In that beginning poll, we saw that there was people that did main planning, event support, and then just showed up day of. All those people are equally important. So it's definitely important to involve other members. Tasks can be anything like shopping for materials, flyering, contacting organizations who could have some interest in either collaborating or tabling at the event, or who you just think their population would benefit from the event you're hosting. For all of these tasks, give timelines, give time limits, and set deadlines. We don't want someone that's supposed to get something done the first week to be like, oh, I thought that was something I could handle later on. A lot of people don't know what requirements are, so if you are the one that is educated on that, make sure you're letting other people know what those expectations are. Consider institutional timelines as well, like safety clearances and catering. Dustin mentioned that there are certain requirements, like you can't just bring Chipotle into the union. So if you do need union catering, they need time. I believe it's 3 weeks notice. That might be changing in the future too, so make sure you're keeping those deadlines in mind as well, because we wouldn't want you putting all this work into it and then day of realizing you forgot to check one of your boxes and now your event can't happen. And last but not least on this anyway is put these details on a master calendar or create a master checklist so that everyone can see what's happening. This way it helps with remembering who you're supposed to hold accountable for these things, or to have those follow-up check-ins and conversations with. Dustin is going to go into our next part talking about our day of show.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to add on to the checklist piece is there are pieces of technology and apps out there that can also help with this. So if you're planning an event, I mean, sometimes the events that we're planning in OUAB are year long. It takes about 8 to 12 months to plan these sort of events. If there are that many tasks and action items, if you're a human that finds technology is helpful to you, there are certain things like Asana or some of these other online platforms that you can plug those things in. You can set deadlines like Krystal talked about. You can delegate to folks. You can have a check-in point. You can help keep folks on track. And I'm sure as you continue to meet with your organization, depending on how long they meet, I'm hoping that's a piece of your conversation and your debrief of like, hey, where are we at? Give me some officer updates or some project lead updates. And that'll kind of help you stay on track too, because Krystal's exactly right that some of that stuff sneaks up, or there's that one thing that slips through the cracks, and then you get to like 3 days before and you're like, oh man, nobody ordered the chicken nuggets for the event. This is not going to be good. So just consider those things as well. Some of those things are free. Some of them have a cost. And try to figure out just what's going to work best for you as a person and you as an organization. So next we're going to kind of go on to the execution piece. So this is my favorite time. I like the planning piece, but I love the execution piece. My team could probably tell you that. So with your day of show in hand, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. You're going to be able to put on your best foot forward in your event. So here are some tips to ensure kind of a successful event. So in creating your day of show schedule, this may be the first time you've heard by that. It could be called a minute by minute, an hour by hour, whatever that looks like. What does your day of show schedule look like, and who's doing what when, from arrival all the way through departure? What are those sort of pieces that can help you, help your members, help volunteers, help audience pieces? They won't see necessarily the specifics behind it, but how do you share that so that everyone makes that aware? I'll share a specific example from a concert setting. We usually print off a day of show and we put it on one of those A-frames or those sandwich boards. That's huge. It's 2 feet by 3 feet. We go ahead and put that backstage. That way all of our production people, all of our artists, any of the volunteers, if anyone has questions, every time they look over at the stage, they can see what that schedule is for the day. So it's very transparent and everyone kind of knows what's happening when meal times are, those sort of pieces. From a concert lens, that's what we try and do because there are so many pieces to that. So you could also do that of sending that out. One thing I've seen people do before is save it as their background on their phone. I do that on any given concert day. I will take a screenshot of what that day of show looks like so I know exactly where to be, and every time I open my phone to look at it, I know where I need to be. Be aware of obstacles and distractions on that day of show. I will always say leave a little bit of buffer time. Again, not if something goes wrong, when it goes wrong. And I don't mean to be pessimistic, but just in my experience with working events, there's always going to be something that goes awry. There are so many variables and so many other people and stakeholders that you all are working with that it's kind of inevitable that there will be something. If there are no errors, that is awesome. Good for you. You've done a great job in planning. Just be able to prep and give a buffer for those things. Work the plan that you've created, but be flexible. Again, that day of show schedule or that minute by minute, if a presenter goes long, if they give too many examples like I give any given time that Krystal and I work together, she's like, all right, man, wrap it up. Just anticipate that and again, leave that little bit of a buffer time to be flexible in case something goes wrong. Allow time to debrief. Oftentimes what I see is even in OUAB or in other organizations, they do the event and then, cool, let's clean up, everybody goes home. How are you setting intentionality for your group about debriefing that opportunity too? Talking through some of those things. A previous university that I was with, after every event, we would sit down with the core folks and we would have a spreadsheet that kind of went through an event like staff assessment or evaluation, and we would go through kind of in a SWOT analysis way, what were some of the things that really worked tonight and what were some of the things that we missed out on. It's more timely and you can remember it quicker in the moment when you were really frustrated that Mike's batteries weren't working, and then a week later, when you're in your next general meeting, you might go, oh yeah, I thought the event was like pretty successful. So leave time for your team to debrief. Again, this is where you might cover some of those questions of, do we feel like students left with something? Did you hear any negative feedback? Were people frustrated? Did it seem like people were happy? Kind of debrief with your team before and after, which is really important. And then again, like what Krystal and I have stressed, have those contingency plans, have backup plans. If you don't necessarily have a different venue locked in, do you have a different date locked in that we're going to make the call 3 days out if the weather's not great or if something's happening with this event or any sort of things are going on in the city that would prevent that from happening in the city of Columbus or anything like that. So make sure to have those contingency and backup plans. So I've talked a lot about a day of show schedule, and we want you to be able to see what one of those looks like. I know that there are some advisors, there are presidents, there are people that have at least led an event. So hopefully you find this helpful, and we're going to send a file out to you all so you can have this for the future. It'll also kind of lead into something that we're going to do in this presentation, but kind of taking a look at a day of show sample. So this one's for just a panel that we made up, looking at kind of those sort of pieces. Again, should have a start and an end time. What's the action item? Where is it? And who's doing it, right? So again, providing that, whether it's printed out or digital or whatever, that will be really helpful for your team. I think Krystal's going to go into chat about assessment with us next.
You would be correct. So assessment. Luckily, Dustin already started off this conversation with talking about the SWOT analysis. That's a really great way to get the information that you need right after what you did well, what you didn't do well. So in case you've never heard of the SWOT analysis, you're looking at your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your strengths, with strengths and weaknesses being more internal focused and opportunities and threats being more externally influenced. So if you're looking to increase your engagement with a particular event, it's really good to look at that opportunities and threats section. But if you're aiming to make an already successful event even better, it's really hone in on those strengths and weaknesses to fine tune what you can be doing better. So that's a great way to really evaluate what you can do to make an event better, but what else can you do to get input from those people that actually attended? So we often default automatically to post-event surveys, and that's a great start, but you know, how we make it a little bit more interesting, more interactive, it could be as simple as putting polls on social media like Instagram or Twitter. It doesn't need to be something formal, just a way for you to get that feedback back. Something else that I've been seeing becoming a little bit more popular is creating poster boards at the exit point or around your event so that people can give you that live feedback. So if the purpose of your event was to create some type of sense of belonging, ask questions like, did you make a connection while you were here? Or it can be something simple like, would you attend an event like this in the future? You can also make this completely your own. So for example, if you're really interested in saying like, wow, we get a lot of juniors and seniors at our events, but we don't get a lot of underclassmen. To see who's actually showing up. There's babies screaming in the background. It's fine, we're fine. You're gonna just get some extra audio, and I love that.
Again, not if something goes wrong, when it goes wrong, right? There's nothing wrong with that.
We're all naturals. It's great. So some ways to pull more specific data about the demographics of the people that are showing up at your events is have that board created and then have 4 or 5 different colored stickers, like yellow is freshman, blue is sophomore, so on and so forth, and then ask people that as they're leaving, so saying, hey, what year are you? Give them that designated color and put that down on the board. So that way you're not only getting who enjoyed your event, but now more specific demographic data. And honestly, one of the most simple ways to get information about how people feel about your event is to just have conversations. You shouldn't just be stationed in one area unless you're doing a specific task, but have members of your board roam around and have conversations with people there to see how they're feeling about the activities that you're offering, or ways that you can make it better and what they're gaining from that.
Yeah, I totally agree with Krystal in that regard of sometimes that word of mouth is actually going to yield you more organic results and actually probably more results than I think a lot of people get really scared when you talk about like event assessment or evaluation. I know it's a big thing for our field in higher ed and here at Ohio State of like, let's assess every little thing to make sure. But a lot of that stuff can be anecdotal. Again, you don't have to go around and host focus groups. You don't have to put out a poll after some of these things. Whatever you feel like, maybe it's an Instagram poll and maybe it's, hey, if you attended this event, did you have a rockin' time or was it terrible? And that can be helpful for you, right? I mean, if you're reporting back to CSA on some of those things and it's a little more serious, maybe you'll take the evaluation piece more serious, but what are you really hoping to gain out of it. And exactly what Liz just talked about, look at your survey fatigue. Ohio State sends so many of those out, and we have a Center for the Study of Student Life, CSSL, that OUAB works with a lot in putting out assessments to students. But sometimes there's not time for that. You have to consider different timelines for that, and when approval and when those things go out. So the university tracks a lot of that. So what sort of anecdotal pieces and more organic assessment or evaluation pieces can you do for your audience to kind of make sure that you're hitting on your why and what you hope to set out? Cool. So now we're gonna, anything else there, Krystal? Nope. Cool. So now we're gonna transition to our activity. So we're gonna do a breakout room activity because we know that folks love these. And so Brooke is gonna help us in putting folks into breakout rooms, and we're gonna go ahead and send out we're gonna drop in the chat a file, and it's gonna be a day of show template file for you. Let's see. Sorry about that. So in your activity, your breakout activity, we're going to ask you to plan an event, or we're going to ask you to put together a day of show schedule for an event that we've kind of come up. We have an example event that we'd love for you to do, and we have kind of some parameters for that. So Brooke, if you want to kind of send out that day of show, I will also kind of put in the chat some of your pieces that you need to abide by, right? So ideally, this event is going in the Ohio Union. We're going to say it's in the Great Hall meeting room. So right on the first floor in that foyer kind of side, more on the high side, High Street side of the Union, on the right-hand side. In that room, we're going to say it is a panel. So it is an alumni panel that your organization is putting on. And you will have access to that room at 4:30 p.m. and you need to be out by 8:30 p.m. And then there is a facilitated Q&A, a student Q&A, and a networking reception that has to happen. And there will also be catering provided at your event. So again, Brooke, maybe even if you can help me kind of put some of those things in the chat to kind of frame that conversation. Again, Ohio Union, you're in the Great Hall meeting room. Your access starts at 4:30 p.m. and ends, you have to be out of the room by 8:30 p.m. So you have 4 hours for event setup, event, and then event cleanup. You are having a facilitated Q&A with any sort of, given facilitator, whoever that is from your organization or someone outside. Then a Q&A with your audience or a student Q&A. A networking reception, and these are in no particular order, a networking reception, and there will be catering. Congrats, you had the funding to offer catering at your event, so there will be catering that will be involved there.
We just wanted to hear some of the things that you talked about in your small group so that you all can learn from each other as well. So the next thing we're going to go into is, first of all, I want to acknowledge that we are running over time. So if you do have to leave, we completely understand. This is being recorded, so you will be able to access it at a later time, and Brooke will probably send out that notification. But a little bit on virtual platforms. So trying to transition into a virtual setting can be daunting. On the slide, I have some examples of various platforms that I've seen groups using for different events. So starting off with Instagram Live or IGTV. This is something that has definitely become more popular recently, especially when you see the success of Swift Beats and Timbaland's series of verses of different artists. I know that's garnered a lot of attention, and I think a lot of other people are utilizing that as well. But it also has a Q&A function that you're able to utilize. You can bring people on and have those one-to-one conversations. So if you are hosting someone or a panelist in any way, that's one way you can kind of conduct a panel, which could be super interesting. As far as IGTV goes, you can include the content that you created and then upload it, but you can also have pre-recorded content. So if you're doing something like a how-to event, you can post it on there for people to follow along at their own time. So Facebook Live, I feel like a lot of people are super familiar with it, but it's a great alternative to live streaming events. So let's say you are able to have a panel, but because of social distancing, not everyone can be in the room. You can still have your panel together. You're able to essentially have them in the room and broadcast that out. And the great thing about that is that it's saved on your page. So that's something that people can visit whenever they want to. So we've seen people utilizing Twitch and Discord as other platforms to use events, but we've all seen the blow up that Zoom has had because of COVID. So I'm going to have Dustin talk a little bit more about features that it has.
Absolutely, yeah. So the Zoom has the capability to allow you to connect with your respective Facebook Live too. So that's a really cool integrative piece in collaborating with those two different companies. You can live caption sessions for accessibility. Brooke kind of talked about this a little bit on the recording side. That can be something that's kind of like automatically done. And then if you want live captioning, I believe Zoom offers that, and there is a cost that's associated. It does get a little bit pricey, but again, when thinking about the impact on your audience, if you are aware of your audience that has some sort of disabilities or anything like that, that's also really beneficial to them. There's basically two different platforms that we use at Ohio State, or two different types. There's a meeting, which you're kind of in right now, which has breakout rooms. It has those sort of pieces, and you may have seen they also offer a webinar feature, whereas some of there are amped up features in some areas, and then there are different ones in others. But that's where you might see like the Q&A section or a panel, or like some of those sort of pieces, which is really cool. Again, all of those offer the chat. The Q&A is webinar specific. The polls, I believe you can do in both. And then obviously you just experience the breakout room functions. So those are great for like smaller groups. Zoom is obviously free to OSU students via Carmen Zoom, so you don't have any issues there. And then registration passwords and authentication is available, so you know that it's pretty protected and safe for you and your attendees.
So we don't necessarily want to push you to Zoom if that's something that you don't want. But if Zoom fits the needs like it does for OUAB to accomplish what you're going for, we want to provide you with some more context for you to consider before deciding how you want to move forward. So would your event be better suited as a meeting or as a webinar? If you are hosting an event that is much more discussion-based between participants, then a meeting may be a better option. But if you're hosting specific speakers and you want it to be a bit more controlled, especially with the questions that are being asked, a webinar is probably a better choice for you. Something that's really cool about the webinar feature is that you're able to promote people that are in attendance to panelists so that they're able to ask questions one-on-one. For OUAB, we did that with our comedy event, Conversation with Eric Andre, and the students absolutely adored it. They had a really great, it was cool because they were able to be like, wow, I'm asking this person this super random question. So it is a really great way to increase that audience engagement as well. So Dustin touched on each has different features. So we do have the breakout rooms, we have the Q&A functions, but again, you're able to promote people with webinars, which can add another dynamic layer. So being mindful that in order to host a webinar, you have to request permission. So the request link can be found under the resources tab on Carmen Zoom, and anyone has the ability to do that. But remember with classes in session that there's going to be a much more limited amount of licenses. So once you do figure out what day you're hosting that event, I would suggest putting that request in. And it's really great because you're able to still access that information afterwards of who attended your event, the total amount of people, and you're still able to record that information. So you can send out those follow-up emails that we talked about when looking at assessment. A technical run-through is super duper important. As you can see, we've been even having some technical issues, and Dustin and I and Brooke and I have met on multiple occasions at this point. So things can still happen. I would suggest scheduling one at least the day before, at the very least, so that everyone is comfortable using the technology, especially if you're bringing in panelists that have never used Zoom or this is your first time using the meeting or the webinar functions. But it's a good time for them to ask questions and get comfortable. But I would also recommend having the people that are running the show up beforehand as well. So for example, this started at 12, we were on at 11:30 just talking through any last minute things. And that way we're able to see if something's not working. Maybe I was supposed to be doing tech stuff, but then my computer started acting up. Justin had everything ready to go just in case. So having that backup is also important. Audience engagement definitely looks different in a virtual setting. So Zoom has the poll feature and it also has chat features, which is helpful. But consider other ways to get the audience interacting. We brought up with the webinar promoting attendees. up to panelists if they're able to have that face-to-face interaction, really continuing that one-in-a-lifetime opportunity or just making them feel a little bit more special than they would as just a regular attendee. It may be a good call to give participants like a way to react or co-sign something that you're saying or something that's said in the chat. So a couple of weeks ago, I was part of this programming board series with the National Association for Campus Activities, and one of our staff members did something that I found super cool, and it caught on for the entire week. She had a presentation around recruitment and retention, and she intertwined DJ Khaled into it. So every time she said something that someone really resonated with or they really agreed with, she would have them type, "I like that," in the chat. I don't follow him. Apparently that's the thing he does. Dustin's laughing, so maybe he knows what he's talking about, but everyone loved it, and it continued on for the rest of the week, and people were super duper engaged. That was possibly the most engagement we got in a session because she gave someone an action to do throughout to continue the excitement and get people listening. The last thing I want to touch on is community events and authentication. So we talked about the fact that to partner with certain people, it has to be open to all Ohio State students. There might be some regulation as to whether community members can attend or not. But as someone who was part of a student organization in undergrad, I know that we often do hold community-wide events that are open to people besides just students. And that is completely fine. But that's something to keep in mind when you're looking at the authentication. It's difficult to authenticate because in order to add that added layer of security, you would have to have an Ohio State Buckeye mail account, which if you didn't go here, you wouldn't have. So again, that is completely fine if you want to make a community-wide event. I would just recommend maybe adding in a different added layer of security with a password code. And then if the event started at 1 and everyone comes in by 1:15 and you know everyone that's going to be at the event is in the event, you can actually lock the room so that you don't have random people showing up. That's another really cool feature that Zoom has that we didn't talk about before, but it's definitely something worth looking into. And I'm also going to drop a document that Zoom created about running engaging events online while Dustin takes it over to our next part.
All right, cool. So, and again, I know that we're tight on time, so if you want to throw it in a chat or at least just think about these things as a result of today or what you learned, hopefully what you're kind of taking away is thinking about what sort of action items you want to take to your next event, whether it's in person, whether it's virtual, whether it's some sort of hybrid. Again, we don't really have any guidance from the university quite yet on what that would look like in the Ohio Union or anywhere on campus, but regardless of that decision that it's made and when it's communicated to you, hopefully you've thought through contingency plans, you've considered all three of those, in-person, virtual, and hybrid, to kind of see how you're engaging audiences and what we can do to abide by Ohio State policies and stuff. But what, if you want to throw it in the chat, you can. What's one thing you learned today? What's one action item that you're taking back to your org, back to your leadership, something that's like, we hadn't thought about that, we've never done that, we want to do this? Feel free to throw it in there. And we can kind of chat more about that. I think this is also a good time to kind of ask if you all have any questions and kind of see, again, I know we're over time and we appreciate you all kind of sticking around our last kind of 6 here or whatever it was. I've put Krystal my contact information up there, so if it doesn't come up right now, you can still reach out to us, or you can reach out to Brooke or anybody on the student activities team. But what sort of questions, if any, do you have? Feel free to kind of unmute yourself and just ask away. We're here to help. And no pressure either way. If you have questions, great. If not, that's also great. You can ask us individually if you're whatever you're feeling.
Alrighty. Well, I'm not seeing that we're really having a ton of questions right now, and that's all good. Hopefully everyone had some really good takeaways with the resources and the links that were dropped in the chat. I think a lot of good things came about from that as well. And thank you so much to Dustin and Krystal for taking the time to chat with us. I know that everyone at the university is busy right now with thinking about what the fall is going to look like. So for you all to take some extra time to chat with our student org friends is so valuable. And we want to continue these connections with student orgs after today. We have more Zoom facilitated student org essentials coming up. Our next one in 2 weeks is all about how to make your digital meetings fun and meaningful. So you can look forward to that. I will post the recording of this session once we get it turned around from Student Life Marketing within about a week or so, I believe. So you'll see that on the programs page, and that's at go.osu.edu/StudentOrgPrograms. And one more thing I wanted to plug was if you had some ideas for future Student Org Essentials topics that you would like to see, anything that we may have not covered, or maybe even things that you want a part 2 or something extended for. We know that we're going to be offering this next school year in the coming fall and spring semester, so I'm going to pop that link to let us know your thoughts in the chat. So that is go.osu.edu/SOE wish list, as in Student Org Essentials. So appreciate your time, all of you. Please let us know what questions you have and how we can help you and support you as we connect with each other and moving toward the fall. So thanks all.
Thanks all. Thanks for sticking around with us. We appreciate you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.